You don't earn respect by talking loud. You earn it by shooting straight. Those words would haunt me for weeks. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the morning everything changed at Henderson Indoor Range. The old-timer never spoke much. Flannel shirt, faded Levi's, plain black cap with no logos, no statements. His shooting form was textbook perfect. His bullet groupings, flawless. Every single time. The young Marines thought he was just another retired construction worker burning through his pension money. Until Staff Sergeant Rodriguez caught sight of that ink on his weathered forearm during a reload. He froze solid. Not because the tattoo was flashy or colorful, because it wasn't. Some symbols you don't just get inked for decoration. You bleed for them. When Rodriguez finally worked up the courage to ask where the old man had served, the entire firing line went dead quiet. The answer didn't come with words or war stories, just two numbers. 1 year. And suddenly nobody was laughing anymore. Welcome back to Forgotten Legends, where we uncover the heroes hiding in plain sight. Before we dive into this story of silence, skill, and buried valor, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, smash that subscribe button. Help us make sure they never fade away. The Henderson Indoor Range opened its doors at 7:30 every morning. But Samuel Sam Richardson was always there by 7:15, waiting in his beat-up Ford pickup. Same parking spot, same routine. Never failed. He never made conversation. Just signed the logbook at the front counter with careful, deliberate handwriting. Last name only, Richardson. No military rank listed. No friendly small talk. No, how's the weather today? Just a polite nod to whoever was working the desk. Then came those measured footsteps to lane 9. Always lane 9. Farthest from the main entrance. Away from the young guys with their portable speakers and ego contests. Away from the noise and the show-offs. His uniform never changed. Worn Levi's that had seen better decades. Forest green flannel rolled up to reveal thick forearms marked by time and weather. That black baseball cap that might have been navy blue once upon a time. No patches, no slogans, no statements. The brim curved just enough to cast shadows over eyes that had seen too much. His work boots showed their age but stayed polished. He carried his shooting bag in his right hand, never hurried, never rushed. Everything he needed fit in one simple case. Single .45 pistol, one box of hollow points, and that dented steel thermos that never left his shooting bench. The regulars started calling him Pops or Old School. Half of them figured he was just another retired tradesman with time to kill and money to burn. They joked about how he only brought one paper target each visit, how he always left after exactly 40 rounds. Same routine, same precision, same mystery. But the range staff noticed things others missed. The way he scanned his surroundings with quiet awareness. How he checked corners and exits without seeming to look. The way his eyes focused not just on the target downrange, but on the still backing behind it. Like he was calculating wind drift that didn't exist indoors. He never flinched at sudden loud noises. Never wasted ammunition. Never bothered picking up his spent brass like everyone else. Most shooters on the line didn't pay attention. But the ones who knew what real looked like, they noticed everything. That Tuesday morning in September started like any other. Except the range was packed tighter than usual. A group of young Marines had rolled in together, fresh off leave, loaded with confidence and competition. One of them, a tall Latino kid with a crisp, high and tight haircut and a Force Recon patch on his gym bag, claimed the lane right next to Richardson's station. His name tag read Rodriguez. He was a reconnaissance trainee on break before advanced training down in Camp Pendleton. Sharp eyes, sharper instincts, the type who could spot authenticity from 50 yards away. At first, Rodriguez didn't pay much attention to the older civilian beside him. Just another weekend warrior plinking away at paper targets. But then something caught his ear. Not the volume of gunfire, not the recoil pattern, the rhythm. 3 controlled shots. Pause. Reset. 2 more shots. Pause. Reset. Tight. Old deliberate. 0 wasted motion. Rodriguez glanced sideways. The old man's grip was textbook military. his stance pure fundamentals. He wasn't fighting the weapon. He was controlling it, commanding it. That's when Rodriguez leaned slightly and caught his first glimpse of Richardson's left forearm during a magazine change. The tattoo was faded from decades of sun and work, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Not a flag, not an eagle, not a skull and crossbones, just numbers, and an insignia that made Rodriguez's breath catch in his throat. That wasn't ink from some downtown tattoo parlor. That was military issue, the kind you earned in blood. I'm born, not bought with cash. Rodriguez had seen enough fake warriors in his time, guys with store-bought patches and made-up war stories. This was different. This was real, and it made his skin crawl with respect. He waited, watched Richardson empty his magazine with surgical precision. Every shot found its mark in the center ring. No flyers, no wild shots, just devastating accuracy that spoke of muscle memory carved in stone over decades. Finally, curiosity won over caution. Rodriguez took a half step closer and spoke. "Excuse me, sir, that ink on your arm, that's First Force Recon, isn't it?" The old man didn't turn around, didn't smile, didn't even acknowledge the question at first. He just fired his final perfect shot, set the pistol down with deliberate care, and slowly looked Rodriguez in the eyes. His answer came without emotion, without pride, without explanation. Once, Wayne, that single word hit Rodriguez like a sledgehammer. Once wasn't a dismissal. It was a door cracking open just wide enough to whisper, "Don't push your luck, kid." So Rodriguez didn't, not yet. He simply nodded, stepped back to his lane, and resumed shooting. But everything felt different now. His rhythm was off, his confidence shaken. His eyes kept drifting left, studying Richardson like he was reading classified documents. The old man took his time with everything. No rush, no flash, no unnecessary movements, just measured precision. Every reload carried the weight of muscle memory burned into his nervous system through repetition and survival. Magazine in, slide check, fire. The grouping tightened with each shot, it always did. After each trigger pull, Richardson would pause, like he was replaying the moment in slow motion, analyzing, adjusting, perfecting. Rodriguez's Marine buddies didn't notice the shift in atmosphere. They were too busy laughing, comparing target scores, making side bets on who could shoot tighter groups. One of them, a young corporal named Danny, leaned over and chuckled. "Hey, that old dude's still holding his own, huh?" Rodriguez couldn't answer, because he'd seen this kind of shooting before, but only from senior instructors, the kind who didn't need to raise their voices to command absolute attention, the kind you automatically shut your mouth for. 20 minutes later, Richardson finished his box of 45 ACP rounds. 40 shots. Not one missed the inner scoring ring. He set the weapon down, pulled a worn cloth from his bag, and began field stripping the pistol right there on the bench. No hurry, no shortcuts. Rodriguez hesitated, then stepped over one more time. "Sir," he said quietly, "if you don't mind me asking, when did you serve?" Richardson didn't answer immediately. He set the cleaning rag down, locked the slide open for inspection, and studied Rodriguez with calm, measuring eyes. Not irritated, not guarded, just evaluating. 68 to 76, he finally said. Recon, Southeast Asia operations. Rodriguez swallowed hard. The timeline matched exactly what he'd suspected. And that faded tattoo wasn't some weekend warrior decoration. That was Marine Force reconnaissance, deep jungle operations, radio silence missions, the kind of deployments where after-action reports got buried in classified files, where names were redacted from official records on purpose. "You were in Cambodia?" Rodriguez asked carefully. Richardson gave the slightest nod, among other places. That's when the noise from the other lanes began to fade. Like the rest of the shooting range had shrunk into a quiet tunnel around Lane 9. Even the joking and trash talk behind them went softer. A few of the younger Marines had picked up on Rodriguez's body language. One or two started watching from a respectful distance. "Did you ever work with Navy SEALs?" Rodriguez pressed. Richardson allowed himself the faintest smile. "We all did a little of everything back then. You swam with the current, you survived the mission, or you didn't come home. Rodriguez couldn't help but grin. Sir, my platoon sergeant told us about an operation in 1973, deep jungle prisoner extraction. The team leader took shrapnel but carried 3 wounded men to the extraction zone under heavy fire. They said the mission stayed classified for decades. Richardson's expression didn't change. A lot of operations stayed classified for decades. Just like that, the door closed again. Not harshly, not rudely, just firmly enough to remind Rodriguez that some stories weren't meant for telling. They were carried like unfired rounds in a chamber, like names that never made it onto metal citations. Richardson stood up, stretched his back with the careful movement of a man who'd earned every ache, and zipped his shooting bag closed. Rodriguez stepped aside instinctively. A few other shooters glanced over, curious now, quieter now. Something about the way the young Marine was acting told them the old man walking away wasn't just anybody. As Richardson turned to leave, Rodriguez did something that surprised even himself. He snapped to attention. Full military bearing. No joke, no sarcasm, just pure respect. Richardson stopped mid-step, looked back. Rodriguez spoke clearly. Sir, thank you for your service, truly. Richardson studied him for a long moment, then walked back over slowly and placed something in Rodriguez's palm. A challenge coin, heavy, real, worn smooth from decades of handling. It bore the Force Recon insignia on one side. On the other, a single word, silent. Richardson leaned in close, voice barely above a whisper. You'll know when it's your turn to go quiet. Until then, earn it. Then he walked away. No salute, no handshake. Just a ghost disappearing into the morning sunlight, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any war story ever could. But Rodriguez wasn't done learning. And what he discovered that night would change everything about how the range treated their mysterious regular. Richardson vanished before most people even realized he was leaving. No goodbye, no acknowledgement. Just picked up his gear, tucked that dented thermos under his arm, and melted into the California morning, like fog burning off the coastline. Rodriguez stood frozen for what felt like hours, the weight of that challenge coin burning a hole in his palm. His mind was spinning faster than helicopter rotors. He'd encountered plenty of stolen valor cases before. Guys wearing patches they never earned, telling stories they never lived. This was the complete opposite. Yo, Rodriguez, Danny called from 3 lanes down. You okay, man? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly turned and walked toward his team, holding out the coin without explanation. They crowded around him, expecting another joke, another smart comment. But when they saw the Force Recon insignia, the mood shifted instantly. Holy shit, Danny whispered. Is that legit? Rodriguez nodded slowly. It's real. Another Marine, a corporal named Williams, frowned. Who gave it to you? Rodriguez's eyes swept the empty lane where Richardson had stood moments before. The man you all ignored, the one you called old dude. That was Staff Sergeant Samuel Richardson. The silence in their throats said everything words couldn't express. Rodriguez walked to the front desk, still carrying the coin like a sacred artifact. The guy behind the counter was sipping coffee and scrolling through social media on his phone. He looked up casually. Everything good out there? Rodriguez placed the coin on the counter with reverence. Tell me about this man. The clerk squinted at the insignia. That the quiet guy from lane 9? Rodriguez nodded. Name's Richardson. What's his first name? The guy pulled up his computer screen and typed quickly. Let me check our records. S. Richardson, member for almost 12 years. Never missed a monthly payment. Always cash, never credit. No email address on file either. Old school through and through. He paused, scrolling down. Whoa, says here he specifically requested no name publication for any recognition events or member spotlights. That's pretty unusual. Rodriguez leaned forward. Any idea why? The clerk shrugged. Nah, man. Only conversation we ever had was once when I thanked him for his service during Veterans Day. He looked me straight in the eye and said, I didn't do it so you could thank me for it. The guy laughed nervously. Never brought it up again after that. Rodriguez didn't find it funny. He just stared at the coin again, then walked out of the building without another word. That night, sleep was impossible. Around 1:30 a.m., Rodriguez fired up his laptop and dove into declassified military archives. What he found would haunt him forever. It took 6 hours of digging through redacted documents, cross-referencing dates, and following paper trails that led to dead ends. Most names were blacked out. Some mission dates were deliberately falsified, standard operational security for classified operations. But eventually, buried in a forgotten MACV-SOG report from 1973, he found it. One line, no fanfare, no heroic language, just cold, bureaucratic facts. Staff Sergeant Samuel Richard Dean, 1st Force Reconnaissance Company, Cambodia, April 15th, 1973. Emergency extraction under enemy fire. Recovered 9 personnel. Refused medical evacuation. Wounded 3 times. Declined Medal of Honor recommendation. File sealed per asset request. Status, operational silence maintained. That final phrase hit Rodriguez like incoming artillery. Operational silence maintained. That was the code back then. You completed the mission. You didn't write memoirs. You didn't give interviews. You didn't post on social media about your trauma. You carried it silently. Forever. And Richardson had carried it all the way to that plastic bench at Henderson Range. All the way through decades of being mistaken for just another retiree with time to kill. But now Rodriguez knew the truth, and knowledge like that changes everything. The following week, Richardson returned to his routine. Same battered Ford pickup, same arrival time, same quiet walk across the gravel parking lot. He nodded to the desk clerk, signed his name in the logbook, and headed for lane 9 with his familiar gear. Range bag, half-zipped, single pistol, box of 40 rounds, that beat-up thermos wedged between his elbow and ribs. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Rodriguez had arrived an hour early, not just him either. 4 Marines from his unit had shown up before dawn, positioned near the back observation area. They didn't speak when Richardson walked past, didn't interrupt his routine. They simply stood at attention, offered respectful nods, and watched with the kind of focus usually reserved for commanding officers. Richardson noticed the change immediately. Not the presence of extra people. There were always crowds at the range, but the shift in energy, less casual conversation, less showing off, more discipline in how ammunition was handled, more courtesy in how lanes were shared. Halfway through his second string of fire, Rodriguez approached, not casually this time, deliberately, respectfully. He waited for Richardson to complete his group, then quietly extended something forward. A fresh box of 45 ACP ammunition, premium hollow points, sealed factory packaging. Richardson studied the offering, then looked at Rodriguez with questioning eyes. Figured 40 rounds wasn't enough today, sir, Rodriguez said simply. For the first time since they'd met, Richardson's nod lasted longer than a half-second. He accepted the ammunition with dignity, reloaded methodically, and continued his practice session. Not a word exchanged, just the soft, unmistakable rhythm of a master craftsman at work. Later, after the brass had stopped rolling and the gunpowder haze had cleared, Richardson sat on the edge of the wooden bench, sipping from his thermos. One by one, the younger Marines approached. Not as a group, not in formation. Quietly, individually, a respectful nod, a firm handshake, a simple sir. Nothing rehearsed, nothing forced, just genuine recognition. Danny, the kid who'd made jokes the week before, lingered longer than the others. He cleared his throat awkwardly. We researched your service records, sir. Some of us, anyway. You saved a lot of lives over there. Richardson wiped the rim of his thermos with his sleeve. They saved each other, he said quietly. Danny opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. He just nodded and walked away, humbled. The last to approach was Rodriguez. He sat beside Richardson on the bench, both men staring downrange at targets that had already been cleared. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. Do you ever think about teaching? Passing on what you know? Richardson exhaled slowly. I spent 30 years trying to forget everything I could teach. He paused, taking another sip from his thermos. The afternoon sun was casting longer shadows across the range. But maybe, he continued, some things need to be remembered. Rodriguez nodded. That's why we're still listening, sir. Richardson studied him for a long moment, then stood up with the careful movements of a man who'd earned every scar. Then talk less, watch more. They both smiled quietly at that, a moment of understanding between warriors separated by decades but united by purpose. That afternoon, something unprecedented happened at Henderson Indoor Range. The staff made a decision that would change everything. Mike Santos, the range manager, had been watching the transformation all week. 23 years running shooting facilities, and he'd never seen anything like it. The way those Marines treated Richardson wasn't just respect, it was reverence, the kind reserved for legends. Santos pulled out his tools in a small brass nameplate, no bigger than a business card. He walked to lane 9 and carefully screwed it into the wood above Richardson's usual shooting position. It didn't say hero, didn't say legend, didn't even mention force recon. It simply read, reserved until further notice, S. Richardson. Richardson never asked who authorized it, never told them to remove it. Some gestures speak louder than explanations, but word was spreading beyond the Marines, beyond the range. Stories like Richardson's have a way of traveling through veteran communities like wildfire through dry brush. Within 2 weeks, everything had changed. First came the Vietnam-era veterans, older men who recognized something familiar in Richardson's bearing, his silence, his unwillingness to discuss what couldn't be discussed. They didn't bombard him with questions. They simply showed up, shot their targets, and offered the kind of nods that said, I know, and I respect the fact that you'll never tell me. Then came the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. Younger warriors who understood that some scars don't show, some stories don't get told, and some heroes never ask for recognition. They brought their own quiet respect, their own understanding of what it meant to carry weight that civilians would never comprehend. Soon, Henderson Range developed an unspoken protocol. When Richardson was on lane 9, conversation volumes dropped automatically. People gave him space, not out of fear, but out of instinctive respect for a man who had earned the right to silence. Rodriguez noticed the change most clearly. What had started as his personal discovery had grown into something much larger. A community learning to recognize authentic valor when it stood right in front of them. One Thursday afternoon, a new face appeared at the range. Colonel Patricia Hayes, retired Army Special Operations. She'd heard whispers through the veteran network about a force recon legend who shot at Henderson Range. She came not to gawk, but to pay respects. Richardson was halfway through his standard 40 rounds when Colonel Hayes approached lane 8. She didn't speak, just set up her own target and began shooting with the kind of precision that comes from decades of military training. After 20 minutes, she finally spoke. Not to Richardson directly, but loud enough for him to hear. Cambodia, 1973, Operation Bamboo Strike. 9 men extracted under impossible odds. Some stories the Pentagon keeps buried because they're too classified to celebrate, too dangerous to acknowledge. Richardson's hands paused on his weapon. For the first time in years, someone had named what couldn't be named. Colonel Hayes continued shooting. The man who led that extraction never got his Medal of Honor. Not because he didn't earn it, because he refused it. Said his men deserved credit, not him. She turned slightly toward Richardson. That man became a ghost. Operational silence. No interviews, no books, no recognition. Just carried the weight and kept moving forward. Richardson set his pistol down carefully. Looked at Colonel Hayes with the kind of recognition that passes between warriors who've walked similar paths. Ma'am, he said quietly, some weights are meant to be carried alone. Not anymore, she replied. Not when you've carried them long enough. That conversation changed Richardson in ways nobody expected. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually like ice melting in spring sunshine. He started arriving 15 minutes earlier each week, started acknowledging the younger veterans with more than just nods, started offering quiet guidance when someone struggled with their shooting form. Rodriguez watched the transformation with wonder. The man who'd spent decades hiding his expertise was finally allowing others to learn from it. One morning, a young veteran named Marcus approached Richardson's lane. Fresh out of the Army, struggling with PTSD, shaking hands, making accurate shooting nearly impossible. "Sir," Marcus said hesitantly, "I can't seem to get my groups tight anymore. My hands won't stop trembling." Richardson studied the young man's target, shots scattered across the paper like buckshot. He could see the frustration, the shame, the fear that he'd lost something essential to his identity as a soldier. "Son," Richardson said gently, "your hands aren't the problem. Your breathing is." He spent the next hour teaching Marcus techniques that couldn't be found in any manual. Methods learned in jungle darkness under enemy fire, when missing your target meant your team didn't come home. "Combat breathing," Richardson explained. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. Your heartbeat is your metronome. Your breath is your foundation. Everything else is just mechanics. Marcus's grouping tightened dramatically. More importantly, his confidence returned. Word spread quickly through the veteran community. Richardson wasn't just a legend from the past. He was a teacher for the present, a bridge between generations of warriors who'd fought different wars but carried similar burdens. Soon, Henderson Range became an unofficial pilgrimage site. Veterans from across Southern California made the drive to see the ghost who'd finally stepped into the light. Not to bother him, not to ask for war stories, but to learn from a master craftsman who'd finally decided his knowledge was worth sharing. The range installed additional benches near Lane 9, created a small informal classroom area where Richardson could work with struggling veterans. Santos even had special business cards printed. "Precision shooting instruction, S. Richardson, by appointment only." Richardson never advertised his services, never charged a fee, never promoted himself. But 3 afternoons a week, he'd arrive early and work with veterans who needed what he could teach. Steady hands, calm minds, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can hit what you aim at when it matters most. The transformation was remarkable, not just in Richardson's students, but in Richardson himself. The man who'd spent 30 years trying to forget his expertise was rediscovering why he'd developed it in the first place. Not to take lives, but to save them. Not to create fear, but to build confidence. Rodriguez, now finishing his force recon training, would stop by whenever he was in town. He'd watch Richardson work with new students and marvel at how naturally teaching came to the old warrior. "You were born for this, weren't you, sir?" Rodriguez asked one afternoon. Richardson cleaned his glasses thoughtfully. "No, son, I was forged for it. There's a difference." He paused, looking out over the range where a dozen veterans were practicing the techniques he'd taught them. "But maybe," he added quietly, "maybe that forging was preparing me for this moment, when the war skills could become peace skills, when the silence could finally serve a purpose." The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew Richardson's story. The man who'd spent decades hiding his capabilities was now using them to heal others. The ghost who'd avoided recognition was finally allowing his light to shine, not for glory, but for service. But Richardson's greatest lesson was still to come, and it would arrive in the form of a challenge that would test everything he'd built at Henderson Range. The challenge came on a rainy Thursday morning in November. Richardson arrived at his usual time to find something that stopped him cold in the parking lot. A news van, Channel 7 Action News, complete with satellite dish and camera crew. Inside the range, a perfectly groomed reporter was setting up for what looked like an ambush interview. She'd clearly done her homework, somehow piecing together Richardson's story from multiple sources. The kind of investigative journalism that turns private heroes into public spectacles. Richardson stood in the doorway, watching her adjust her microphone. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, climb back in his Ford, and disappear forever. 30 years of operational silence doesn't die easily, but then he saw them. Marcus, the young veteran with PTSD, standing nervously near Lane 9. Colonel Hayes, arms crossed, looking like a protective mother bear. Rodriguez, now back from advanced training, positioned between the reporter and Richardson's usual shooting station. A dozen other veterans Richardson had quietly mentored over the months. They'd formed an unconscious barrier, not aggressive, just present, protective, ready. Mike Santos approached Richardson with an apologetic expression. "Sam, I'm sorry. She showed up an hour ago with some story about a mystery war hero teaching at local range. I told her this was private property and she needed permission, but—" "Mr. Richardson!" The reporter's voice cut across the range like a fire alarm. I'm Jessica Chen from Channel 7 News. I'd love to ask you a few questions about your decorated service in Vietnam and your current work with veterans here at Henderson Range. The entire facility went silent. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. Richardson looked at the camera pointing in his direction, at the reporter with her practiced smile and predatory eagerness, at the story she wanted to extract from him like shrapnel from an old wound. Then he looked at his students, his community, the men and women who'd found healing in his quiet wisdom, who'd learned to shoot straight and stand tall because he'd shown them how. Marcus stepped forward slightly. Sir, you don't owe her anything. We can handle this. Colonel Hayes nodded grimly. One word from you and that camera crew will be escorted off the premises, permanently. Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively toward his phone. I can make some calls. This story dies here if you want it to. Richardson felt a warmth he hadn't experienced since his force recon days. The protective loyalty of teammates who'd stand with you against anything, who'd take fire for you without question. But then he remembered something Colonel Hayes had said months earlier. Some weights are meant to be carried alone, not anymore. Not when you've carried them long enough. Richardson walked slowly toward the reporter, his footsteps echoing in the silent range. Everyone tensed, unsure what was coming. He stopped 3 feet from the camera and looked directly into the lens. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd led men through hell and brought them home. Ma'am, I appreciate your interest in what we do here, but you're looking at the wrong story. Jessica Chen blinked, clearly expecting denial or deflection. Mr. Richardson, our research shows you were involved in several classified operations that saved numerous lives. Don't you think the public deserves to know about heroes like yourself? Richardson shook his head gently. I'm not the hero in this building. He turned and gestured toward Marcus. That young man survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, came home with invisible wounds, and found the courage to ask for help. That's heroism. He pointed to Colonel Hayes. That woman commanded special operations in Iraq, broke barriers for female soldiers, and now volunteers her time to mentor the next generation. That's heroism. His gesture swept across the room. Every person in this building who chose to serve their country, who came home carrying burdens they didn't ask for, who found ways to heal and help others heal, they're the real story. Jessica Chen pressed forward. But your classified service record shows that I was part of a team, Richardson interrupted firmly. Every mission, every extraction, every success belonged to Marines who trusted each other with their lives. I was just one piece of something much larger. He paused, looking directly into the camera again. If you want to tell a story that matters, tell the story of what happens when communities support their veterans. Tell the story of healing. Tell the story of how military skills can build instead of destroy. Richardson stepped back slightly. But my personal history? That stays personal. Some silence isn't about shame, it's about respect. Respect for the men who didn't come home. Respect for operations that are still classified. Respect for families who lost everything so missions could succeed. The reporter tried one more approach. Don't you think your story could inspire other veterans to seek help? Richardson smiled for the first time since the camera arrived. Ma'am, look around. The inspiration is already happening. Every day. Quietly. Without cameras or headlines. That's how real healing works. He turned to Mike Santos. Mike, I think it's time for our morning session to begin. Santos nodded immediately. Absolutely. Ma'am, this is a private training session for veterans. I'll need you and your crew to clear the premises. Jessica Chen made one final attempt. Mr. Richardson, surely you understand the public interest in... Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her command presence filling the room. The gentleman asked you to leave, respectfully. Don't make us ask less respectfully. The reporter looked around the room, reading the unified body language of 24 veterans who'd closed ranks around their teacher. Professional instinct told her the story was over. After the news crew packed up and left, the range remained quiet for several minutes. Richardson stood at lane 9, hands resting on the shooting bench, processing what had just happened. Rodriguez approached first. Sir, that was perfect. The way you redirected the focus to all of us instead of yourself. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. You could have taken credit for everything, could have been famous, but you chose to honor us instead. Richardson picked up his pistol case, handling it with the same care he'd shown for decades. Fame doesn't heal trauma, son. Community does. Quiet work does. Showing up every day does. He began his familiar routine, unpacking his single weapon, loading his magazine, setting up his target. But something was different now. Lighter somehow. You know what the real mission was? Richardson asked as he chambered his first round. It was never about the shooting. It was about showing you that precision comes from peace, that accuracy comes from acceptance, that hitting your target, in combat or in life, starts with being still inside yourself. Over the following months, Richardson's refusal to seek spotlight became legendary in its own quiet way. Veterans across the country heard about the Force Recon Ghost, who turned down fame to focus on healing, who'd chosen teaching over celebrity, who'd proven that the most powerful stories don't need to be shouted to be heard. Henderson Range became a model for veteran support programs nationwide, not because of publicity or government funding, but because of one man's decision to transform his wartime skills into peacetime wisdom. Richardson never gave another interview, never wrote a book, never sought recognition. But every Thursday morning, he continued arriving 15 minutes early, ready to work with whatever veteran needed what he could teach. And Rodriguez, now a fully qualified Force Recon Marine, would stop by whenever possible, watching his mentor work with new students and understanding more clearly with each visit that true leadership isn't about commanding attention. It's about quietly serving others until they find their own strength. The brass nameplate above Lane 9 remained unchanged, reserved until further notice, S. Richardson. But everyone who knew the story understood it meant something deeper. It represented a space where healing happened without headlines, where wisdom was shared without fanfare, where one man's refusal to be a public hero had created something more valuable, a private sanctuary for warriors learning to find peace. So I ask you now, have you ever encountered someone like Samuel Richardson, a veteran who never boasted, never demanded recognition, just stood quietly in the background, carrying history in their hands and healing in their heart? Share their name in the comments below. Tell us their story. Let the world know who they were before the silence claimed them. Because here at Forgotten Legends, we believe the most powerful stories aren't the ones that make headlines. They're the ones that make a difference. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Help us keep these voices alive. We'll see you in the next episode. And remember, if you ever see an old warrior at the range, shooting slow, standing alone, watch their stance. Listen to their rhythm. You might be witnessing a masterclass in more than marksmanship. You might be standing next to a legend who's still teaching, still serving, still showing us that the greatest heroism happens in the quietest moments.